McLaren or a Lamborghini or a Ferrari, something like that, on 100 people. I mean, they're everywhere. You go to the mall and it's like, yeah, so what? You've got a 458 Italia. Who cares? Yeah. You know, that's last year's model.
Yeah.
Like, so my point is, you see this massive divergence where you have this small group of people in Scottsdale, let's say, that are, you know, hanging out in the rich areas. They've got 10 times more Ferraris, Bentleys, Lamborghinis, Aston Martins. And yet when you look at the 99%, the homeless population has increased tenfold as well. And that dog does not hunt for very long. And, you know, another very interesting statistic, or what I heard on the Joe Rogan podcast, is one of my favorites, a guy named Brett Weinstein. And he's not a macro guy, but he's, I believe, an evolutionary biologist. And his brother's a genius as well, Eric Weinstein. But I really enjoy listening to them both. And on this episode of Rogan's podcast, they were talking about wealth inequality. And Brett pointed out that throughout history, it isn't necessarily the how well or how badly the people at the bottom are doing. That's not what gives you social unrest. Typically, what gives you the social unrest is the delta between who's at the bottom and who's at the top. So as an example, in a society where the bottom, let's say, was making $15,000 a year, but the top was making $100,000, you wouldn't have near as much social unrest as a society where the bottom is making $30,000, but the top is making $3 million.
Yeah, it's a relative thing. It's always relativity, isn't it? It's the extremity, because it almost creates parallel universe syndromes of existence.
It is a parallel universe here. It absolutely is, like nothing I've ever seen. And most people can't appreciate that who live in the United States, because it's just like looking at yourself in the mirror every day. Yeah. You know, you just can't see those subtle changes. But for someone like me who leaves the United States for years on end and comes back, it's just like, it's like looking at yourself in the mirror 5 years later. You're like, whoa, what on earth happened?
Yeah.
And it's the same thing coming back to the US. You can see these dramatic changes that are just startling.
Yeah.
That I just don't think most Americans see.
There's a great channel that I was watching. I think it's called The Black Pigeon. And by the way, all those people you mentioned, I've been to Scottsdale. It was lovely. We were working with Infusionsoft, which is in Phoenix, Arizona. And we had an amazing night out with one of our members of our community. It's a beautiful area. And there were great car dealerships all around. I'm also a car nut like you. And I can tell you, in London, when I was last there, you can go to central London, which is exceedingly wealthy. And every ATM has a glue-sniffing drug addict under a blanket or a sleeping bag. And then there's a certain part where in lay-bys, they're lying on top of each other in rows. And there's actually, he was highlighting the differences in etiquette and quality of culture of the Japanese, and how the West has kind of lost their he was part blaming it on excessive immigration. I don't want to go down there, but he was saying there was in Japan, which is pretty homogeneous, they actually have these toilets with a smoked glass when you enter in it, and everything is kept immaculately clean. And he was saying, here's this public toilet, because he's a UK YouTuber, and he was saying it's just impossible to use because there's all the drug addicts and all of that. And it says we've lost our sense of culture. And it had a lot to do also with just this complete polarization of society, because there was just drug addicts, loss of common esprit de corps and culture, and this polarization of wealth. And it was in the wealthiest areas that this was happening. And he was saying, he was just asking the question, how can you have such high levels of mutual respect in one society and not in another? But it was also highlighting the polarization of wealth and the amount of people that have been left behind. And it's shocking. It's absolutely shocking. And as you say, it's the seeds of revolution. But my concern in terms of that is that it's not actually these drug addicts on the street. They become the useful idiots. And that the real revolutionaries are probably the people that orchestrated the situation in the same sense, because it's also noticeable that it seems through academia that's been very well published, we are going to this Bolshevik sympathizer type socialist solution. And it almost seems it's the West's time to get flattened. The Russian culture is deeply scarred. They keep to themselves. They don't show too much emotion, etc. I call this the sort of almost like MK Ultra trauma to an entire society coming out of Bolshevism, and the amount of deaths and how people spied on each other and the Stasi and all of that sort of thing. There's this Eastern European and Russian sort of suppression. My partner is from that area, and she loves America just because people say, hey, how you doing, and smile and say that, and you feel engaged against as a person, and how that was dangerous culturally to do in behind the curtain. I worry now for this movement that is swinging towards to come and flatten the West. And could we face, and I'm hardly bringing the joy and the Christmas spirit by asking this question, but could we face this rat out your mate culture, this over-authoritarian government? Who do you think owns gold? I have concerns that we're going down that road.
You're already seeing that happen in the United States, that rat out cult. I mean, look at California. I'm not sure whether it was the government or the governor, whatever political figure comes out and is advising you to basically rat out your neighbor if they're having more than 2 or 3 cars in their driveway, or you see them walking by without wearing a mask or something. You're already seeing that, I think, everywhere in the United States at alarming levels. So that's part of the present. I don't think that's part of the future. Well, it's part of the future, but I think it's already here right now. And going back to the central planners and what you're saying about Klaus and the Great Reset, one thing that I think is really good about that is more and more people that are maybe closer to the mainstream than I am are talking about it, and their guests are talking about it. I'm thinking about the Tom Woods podcast, and I'm a big fan of Tom Woods. But he doesn't get too much into the economic stuff, just more on the libertarian side. But he had a guy on there that was an expert on the coronavirus and whatnot. And this guy starts talking about Klaus and the World Economic Forum, and how so many people that are part of the World Economic Forum are heads of pharmaceutical corporations. And that you've got to start connecting these dots. And I had never even really thought about that angle, but I'm like, okay, this is great that people are actually starting to think this through. And the tinfoil hatters are becoming less and less and
mainstream.
Less tinfoil hatty.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've been one of them from the get-go. I felt all of this was coming a long time, but part of that is also a worry. Because essentially what we're saying is more people have spotted the wolf. But it's a case that at some point the wolf had to break cover to escalate this. If we see a large amount of this COVID response being also very control orientated, very dictatorial, etc., etc. Is it not a concern now that they have effectively believed that they've got the game so much under control that they can make their move at this point, and they can bring about all these changes, and that just because we're all waking up, it's not going to be likes on my YouTube and shares on my Facebook that is going to stop them. And in a sense, the internet has become our primal scream room for crying about our fears. But if that's how you're revolting, they don't care. They're just giving you a tag as being divergent for later when they're choosing who goes to the gulag. But it doesn't stop the steamroller that seems to be working slowly but very certainly, and it seems to almost have caught a bit of a downhill, and now every time I look, it's halfway down the street, coming a lot closer to my front door. And I mean, this is outside maybe economics, but economics is a social science as well. It's politics, it's power, it's money, it's everything. So I think we're in our scope to discuss it. What should the guys do watching this right now as we're saying, man, this stuff's getting out of hand? How do we slow the machine? And I'm not saying grab a pitchfork and go and stab a politician in the neck. I don't think that serves you. But how do we push back? And how do you personally prep?
Yeah, I think there's two sides of the coin. and that I am alarmed at how rapidly the IMF and the World Economic Forum are openly discussing things like central bank digital currencies and a digital SDR, and where they want to be in 2030, where you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. But on the other hand, I think it's good from the standpoint that sunlight is the greatest disinfectant.
Yeah.
So if you've got bad ideas, we want them to be out in the sunlight. We don't want them hiding out in the shadows, because once they're exposed to that sunlight, people can intuitively see what's going on here. They don't have to be a conspiracy theorist or Alex Jones or anything like that. And just a good example of this is if you go to the World Economic Forum's videos on YouTube, just type in like Great Reset and look at the amount of the percentage of down votes to up votes, or thumbs up to thumbs down. And they'll have like 2 or 3 thumbs up and like 3,000 like thumbs down.
But let's be frank, they didn't sit and plan this in the dark rooms for all these many years, and I think this has been many years in planning, and expect to break it in cover with us all knowing our freedoms are going to be reduced, only to be put off because there's a couple of downvotes on their material. We need...
Well, I don't think they're going to be put off by it, but
No.
I think that it's good that it's out in the sunlight, so the normies, not just people like you and I, but just everyday people see this and share it with their friends. Like, this is insanity. Like, look at this Klaus guy. In fact, I had a bunch of people over the other night for that Mike Tyson fight.
Oh, yes, very good.
Yeah, so I had a bunch of people, and a few of those individuals that I don't really know that well, they came up to me and they're like, man, we've been watching your videos. We saw that video on Klaus. That guy is crazy. What's going on with that? And the whole entire that night, they're wanting to talk to me about how insane Klaus is from watching my videos. And these are mainstream, like 9 to 5, corporate gig. They're not like, fringe type of individuals. So I think that's great news. But again, I totally understand that it is alarming that they're spreading that message even more, and they're having the huevos to get out there and do it. Another thing I'd point out that most people don't realize, if you have any inclination that the global elite don't play a big role with the people pulling the strings at social media, you need to rethink that very quickly. And I'll give you an example. So like 2 weeks ago, Klaus, of all people, joined Twitter. I don't know. I don't know if you knew
no,
that.
I know he does. Is he wearing his Dark Lord of the Sith outfit again?
No, that was like a fake Klaus account. But it's an official, Klaus Schwab account.
Yeah.
And I have been having this problem with people setting up fake George Gammon accounts.
Me too, yeah.
And trying to scam people. I mean, it's getting just outrageous.
Bots,
the amount of people almost weekly that set up fake George Gammon Instagram accounts, Twitter accounts, and YouTube constantly, and trying to scam people with crypto this and crypto that. So my point is, I'm always having my assistant email Twitter and email YouTube and all these other to get me verified with those blue check marks.
Yeah.
So we'll know that it's me, so they're not getting scammed out of $10,000 or $20,000. Which I feel horrible about, and I feel partly responsible for. So we're really proactive about trying to do that. And my assistant, every single time she goes to Twitter, she gets the exact same pleasant email in return, and she forwards it to me that they say, unfortunately, right now they're not doing any blue check mark verifications, and they won't start accepting applications until sometime mid-2021.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, let's go back to 2 weeks ago. Klaus just
straight away
pops on the very first time, sets up an account. The very first day, the very first hour, who knows, he gets a blue check mark from
Straight
Twitter
away.
verifying his account. While Twitter is telling me that they're not doing that anymore, they're not going to do it till 2021. So at the very least, you know that these global elites have a lot more pull, let's say,
Oh,
than
definitely.
you and I do. And I'm someone that, I don't have a large following, but on Twitter, I've got maybe 45,000
Yeah.
followers. So it's not like I've just got 10 or 20 or something.
Yeah.
I've got a significant amount of people who follow me there. So it goes back to Orwell, an Animal Farm. It's all animals are created equal, but some are more equal than others.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's at the very least. And if you really want to put the tinfoil hat on, you need to start asking yourself, okay, well, who really operates these social media platforms? And I'm not saying that it's Klaus. I would probably lean on the side of saying that he's got a lot of clout, and those people at Twitter know that, hey, yes, he doesn't run the show here, but it's in our best interest to go ahead and give this guy a blue check mark if he wants one and ignore everyone else.
I'd just add a narrative to that. I don't know if you recall, you mentioned Alex Jones, I'll just bring it up. He was simultaneously deplatformed by a smorgasbord of social media, which, remember, they're supposed to be independent, separate businesses. And just prior to that, they'd all been called in to see the Atlantic Committee, which is run by no less than Henry Kissinger, and has the Atlantic magazine, etc., etc. And they were all brought in and chatted to, and then simultaneously made this sweeping. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, if you and I are rivals and you're selling cars and I'm selling cars, I don't say we don't serve these people at the same day that you do. We're independent. They made their decision for whatever reason. We're a different business. So it was very ironic that it was almost universally agreed. And Apple removed him from iTunes or whatever the equivalent is, iStore now. So it was certainly orchestrated, which means there's a hidden layer above, because these CEOs might talk to each other out of professional interest if they're over at the Bilderberg meeting, but they're supposed to be competing. And they're supposed to have different views of how to serve people. And when you get a uniform blanket action, it points to heads being smashed together, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, that takes me back to my days as an entrepreneur. And sometimes you just have to make hard decisions where both options are bad. Yeah. And so if I'm going to give those CEOs the benefit of the doubt, let's just do that for a moment. I'm not saying this is accurate. Let's just give as much of the benefit of the doubt as we possibly can. I've been not in a position like this, but as an owner of a business and as an entrepreneur, I've been in a position where you're like, okay, I've got two options and they're both bad. Yeah. So you've got to take the least bad option. And a lot of times it has to do with, your employees. That's one thing that's tough, really tough about Silicon Valley and San Francisco, is they're so desperate for good employees and engineers that a lot of times that comes into play. I was listening to, I think it was Sam Harris on the Rogan podcast, and they were talking about this insanity and how pervasive it is in Silicon Valley. And Sam was telling a story about how he had just had dinner with several of these social media executives that he said, you definitely know their names. And one of them, who he was sitting next to, was talking about how it's just everyone there has just completely gone off the deep end. And so this is what they're saying behind the closed doors, right? Yeah. And he gave an example of an employee where now in their main offices, let's call it Google, right? Sam didn't name any names, but let's just call it Google. Yeah. They're having to put cat litter boxes in all of their bathrooms for the employees that think they're a cat or identify as a cat.
No, come on.
And the guy's like, almost like breaking down, like pulling his hair out, but he's saying, Sam, I don't have a choice.
No
Like
way. I can't believe
I
that.
have to do it. So maybe there's a component there too.
Wow, it's the end of times. George, it's great having you on. I wanted to ask you before we let you go. I've got one question from a big fan, by the way, who follows your channel, is member of our community as well. We've got a great overlap, by the way, and we're always happy in sharing your YouTubes. He says, I asked him because he's one of our insiders, been with me for a while. If you had a question for George, what would you ask? I kind of gave him my answer, and I even thought, no, I don't know if your question's right, but I want to respect him and ask it. He thinks,
Sure.
And he says, what if there was no major reset? What if could it be the situation be saved? In other words, I said to him, there's too much debt. He said, but maybe if they make the right decisions. I said, they're swinging communist. He says, could the situation be saved? Am I just a pessimist? Are you just a pessimist? Or are we getting a blow-off event, a major smackdown, and then being introduced to what's been planned, a new system? Is there any way we don't go through this hard rebirthing and that we could return to logical, sensible money? The debt could be kind of whittled away, deflated away, and that we actually have a soft landing, which doesn't involve a financial Bretton Woods Mark II moment and a full-blown revolution. Give us your take. What would have to happen for that even to potentially occur?
I think it's possible, but it's a matter of probabilities.
Yeah.
And so what you're talking about is kind of like a Ray Dalio beautiful deleveraging.
Yeah.
And we could just somehow magically create this, let's call it 5% inflation, while we peg the yield curve, keep interest rates low, and just gradually over time kind of inflate away the debt with as little pain as possible.
Yeah.
That's, again, it's possible, but I think the probabilities would be incredibly, incredibly low. Now, we talked about the Great Reset and these global elite coming in. I think that there's a good chance that the majority of people just don't go for that. And I think what's even brighter is the fact that a lot of the countries will not go along with the Great Reset because it's not in their best interest at all, such as the Middle East, such as places like Brazil and Russia, for that matter. There's a very low probability that they'll go along with this nonsense. So there's going to be kind of areas of hope out there. But I think my base case would be we're going to just gradually grind lower from an economic standpoint. And there's people that say, well, it's deflation, it's inflation. I'm not sure which it's going to be, but you're going to have negative real GDP growth. And in a recent video, I used a chart of Japan going back to actually the 1970s. And you just see this, we know what happened in 1990, but it was kind of on a downtrend before then anyway, even with this big spike we had in the late 1980s. And since then, it's just gone down and down and down and down. And you look at Rome as another example. It's the same type of thing. You just had this gradual grind, just lower and lower and lower, where the wealth of the society was destroyed. And I think it's a lot easier for people to see when they look at the wealth of a society, not in terms of how many currency units it has, but its ability to produce more goods and services ever, or at increasing rates of efficiency. And once that starts going in the opposite direction, which is where I think we're headed now, it's just this standard of living or the wealth of society just decreases. And I think it just keeps going down and down and down and down until change is thrust upon us. I don't think we'll get to a point where we consciously change and say, okay, we're going in the wrong direction. We need a new monetary system. This Eurodollar system isn't working out anymore. And this fiat just doesn't pan out. We need to make a complete 180. We know we're going to have to bite the bullet. We know there's going to be some economic pain, but it's going to be better in the long run. That's possible, but I think it's highly, highly probable. It's very, very low. I hope we can get there, but I highly doubt it. And again, it goes back to another video I did where you look at how entrenched the interests are of the government, of the people for that matter, because, everyone now, who wants to get rich going out there and working 80 hours a week and committing your life savings and waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning and sacrificing everything when I could just buy Bitcoin, or I could just buy gold, or I could buy, I could just buy something and the asset goes up in price. And then you have the Cantillon effect with all these people at the World Economic Forum, where the more they can destroy economic output, the more money the central banks and governments will print. And of course, they're closest to that money printing.
Yeah.
Therefore, they get richer and richer and richer. So you have all of these entrenched interests. And that's why I think, again, the probability of us making a decision to change is very, very low.
And it has to be universal, where it seems like we almost synchronized in the opposite direction. As you've already mentioned, the MMT. I mean, one of my cues was going to be, is MMT now already official policy? And in your opening statement, I think you almost answered that. And the problem is we have it, it doesn't matter if you're in Australia or if you're in America or in Europe. It seems to be across the board. So we almost have a synchronized group of people that all decided we've all got to be lepers in the leper colony. And unfortunately, that's not conducive to a healthy system. So I tend to agree. It requires, it's nothing is impossible, but it would take a very strong leadership that would have to transcend nation states to synchronize in doing exactly the opposite of what they've been setting up to do. And I think they've been setting up to do what they're doing for a reason. And I don't think that reason, these are long-term planners. I don't think that reason changes until they've got the outcome they want. Right. But yeah, thanks. As you always say, and you made a very interesting point, don't get into a belief system. Don't suffer from 100% conviction. No matter how I feel the strength of this economic bias, we can and will be wrong. And those are really powerful principles. And certainly don't place...
Be very careful that you're not putting yourself into a social media echo chamber.
That's exactly it. Because, I mean, they are self-selecting as well. All of these media chambers. If you just look at your Facebook and all that, I've got people, because of certain views I've expressed that have similar views that keep being put on my list of new friends and that are sending me requests. And I don't get categories outside of that. So it's very easy, as you say, to get echo chamber. You need to bump into those other people that think the exact opposite of what you do, just for that reality check that they are out there. I'm also going to just check some of the comments here. Guys, why don't you post some comments? We got a live stream going out as well right now, George. In fact, you're very popular, and the number's 629 already coming on. Lots of likes, lots of shares. I've got George Gammon here in the room. While I ask George, what's your best what's your fastest horse and your second and third horse in that portfolio that you're having? What's your favorite trade or investment? You guys post a question in the comments, and let's see what you'd like me to ask George while we got him on the stream.
I like coal. Because everyone hates it. And I like that. It's just because I'm very contrarian in my views. I like copper in March. I loved it in March. It's got, the prices run quite a bit lately, so maybe waiting for a pullback there. But also I like the gold miners. Around this area, they've got beaten up a little bit. I'm not sure what the price did this last week. I wasn't paying much attention, but I like them because I think that there's a great argument with all of the money printing that we'll most likely have in the future when they change the Federal Reserve Act or continue to ignore it. And that's going to give a lot of tailwind to Bitcoin, a lot of tailwind to gold. It's just, I like gold a little bit better right now because there's less emotional investing from what I see around the miners, and everyone thinks they're kind of gone for dead. And I always like those investments better than the ones everyone's excited about.
I like your call there. In fact, I started to look strongly at gold again when everyone started talking about Bitcoin's destroyed gold.
Yeah,
I'm
exactly.
like you. I get a bit nervous when my echo chamber is too one-sided and too many people are sitting on the same side of the boat. I straight away went and we'll cover that one. Let me just show you copper because you haven't had a chance to see it in a bit. Yep, just hold on a second. Getting the copper chart up. This is one of them. That's on the monthly. George very nicely liked it in March, and you were around 339 there, and it's virtually doubled, George. So that was a great shout by you on the copper side. I actually had gone a
I
bit.
actually made more money on coal. I made more money on coal back in March. I bought
Wow.
coal at I bought the coal ETF KOL when it was under well, they did a reverse stock split, but it basically, oh, what did it do? It I think it more than doubled in price. Then they dissolved the ETF, so now you're getting your money back. So now I've got to kind of create my own ETF with what's left. I'm kind of in the process of doing that with Chris McIntosh. But that's kind of had a run too. But they're still, relatively speaking, uranium would fall into that category as well. It's had quite a run since I bought a lot of it in March, but still, historically speaking, it's super super cheap.
Of the energy plays that you've mentioned, that's the one I personally like the most because I think coal is going to be a hard sell. It's the dirtiest of the lot, but there's
Yeah,
plenty
but
of it.
I'm allergic. So the use of steel, that's really I think the demand bull argument would be if the governments come in with Green New Deals, it's going to require a ton of steel. And they're not going to be able to make that steel without coal. And then you look at the supply side destruction, and that pretty much everyone who has sold or would sell has already sold because all these funds getting it out, not wanting to touch it with a 10-foot pole because of environmental reasons. So that's kind of looking at it maybe from a different angle.
Yes, it's so unloved that it's got only upside.
Yeah,
And,
and
and
tobacco too. Tobacco, last time I looked at it, was pretty darn cheap. And most people don't realize the best performing stock in the entire stock market since 1968 has been Altria, the cigarette maker.
wow, that I didn't know that. I know they were making money hand over fist, but I wasn't
Yeah,
aware.
and it's been the best performing asset class or the best performing stocks since the mid 1990s.
Wow, wow, that is
Tobacco,
special.
that being tobacco.
What do you make of Tesla, George? I mean, fundamentally and then technically, because I think I have two separate views. There's something going on there. There's a freight train. Obviously, the SP 500 inclusion has been the recent fire, but what's it? $1 million market cap must be getting close to 1.25 million or 1.5 million per
Trillion.
car.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fun to watch. I wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole on either side. It's just not the way I invest. I don't like buying $1 for $3 and hoping it goes to $5.
No.
So many people, and even in my investment community, they'll say, they'll talk about this new technology or this new XYZ fill in the blank, and you're basically angel investing. There's
Yeah.
no profits there, that you're just kind of speculating on the future. I don't really like doing that too much. I like buying $1 for 50 cents,
Yeah.
and it's a completely different strategy. And so I like businesses that are making a ton of money, that have a lot of cash flow, but that cash flow is discounted for whatever reason. And you're not really speculating on whether or not this business will ever make money, and that all the stars kind of have to align. And I think that although Tesla, the downside, I'm not talking about the price. I'm talking about the company actually going out of business.
Yeah.
That downside is a lot lower now because they would have so much access to just limitless capital, unless we get a bear market. And that's something that most, and the Fed, let's say they can't come in and prop it up. Let's say let's say we go into Japan mode from 1990 all the way to today, where in nominal terms the stock market is lower. Europe, exact same thing. Gunlack points this out all the time. So it's not that the United States stock market is somehow unique in the sense that it can never go down. We could come into a bear market, and in 20 years we could be lower nominally than we are today. So you'd have to think through kind of what that means. And if interest rates do go back up to where these pension funds can meet their obligations of 7% returns by buying 10-year treasuries instead of having to take that money and speculate in a VC fund that buys WeWork and Tesla and Uber and DoorDash, then they're going to do that. So you have all of those flows come out of at least these new IPOs. And you kind of have to scratch your head and say, okay, well, where do all these other companies that just burn, incinerate cash, but yet have $100 billion market cap, where do they end up in an environment where the 10-year is trading at, call it 5 or 6%? I don't know if they still exist, because that super cheap money, or this environment where money is just being thrown on any company that has a story, that's gone. Yeah. And that might be the reality check for a lot of these quote unquote tech companies like Tesla and DoorDash, or maybe not. Maybe it just keeps going in the same direction and money just becomes looser and looser. And I don't know, but it's the same thing as bonds. I wouldn't buy bonds on the long end right now, just because I don't like to buy things when they're at 5,000-year highs. And I like to buy things when they're cheap, and there's nothing cheap right now about bonds, and there's definitely nothing cheap right now about Tesla.
No. I often wonder, because if we go work backwards with the end in mind, let's take our scenario casting efforts that says Klaus knows something we don't, or is orchestrating something through a network of dark forces. How do you get everybody out of their assets? Well, one of the best ways, particularly when I think of it's property is one of the most fundamental things, turning everyone into a rental class. How do you get people out of their property? Well, you create a boom, you get everybody leveraged, and then you put interest rates up. I remember being around or hearing the stories when they were defending the pound, when the Soros event occurred. And you had folks in the dealing room floors saying, who wants a house? Because the guy's interest rates had just gone from effective paying, because they were all on floating rates. They weren't on fixed rates. And now that disease has I don't know how much it's caught on in the States now. I mean, if I was buying property, and you had the option of a 30-year fixed, I'd take it, even if it was more expensive, just for eliminating the tail risk, and because it will be a low fixed. But what about the spike? I like your notion and your idea of interest rate risk, because I think that's a great way of getting the banks to own everybody's property. And also for clearing out, I mean, there's a lot of commercial property with nowhere to go. No one's going to offices anymore. Everyone's working from home. You want to repurpose that into your high density urbanized sleeping capsules for the peasants. You've got to pick all that land and that property up, and you want to pick it up cheap, spike the rates, put the final, stake through Dracula's heart. Government, aka the banks, and the government by decree, or dark government, whatever you want to call it, actually ends up taking all those assets and saying, you're forgiven on your debt. That's the big deal. But now we're doing this, and you have to do the following: go get your vaccine, do etc. So I like the argument that interest rate policy, because what a Fed could spring a trap on us. They also MMT, they lure us all into the sensitivity. Oh, okay, money for everyone, UBI for everyone. Then we start to get into the inflationary. They can quite justifiably saying, well, we're acting in the best interests. We can't have a parabola where the dollar does the Zimbabwe dollar. We have to put a stop under it. Real rates we need positive real interest rates again. They could spike it up. In the UK, it spiked in the pound crisis when the government was wasting pounds on defending a overly high peg that Thatcher negotiated to the euro. They wasted the citizens' money by attempting to defend it. And in the end, they had to put the interest rates up anyway. And so you actually had, in the series of a couple of days, interest rates going from normalized levels of around 4 or 5, don't quote me on the exact numbers, 4 or 5%, getting into the near mid-teens in
Yeah.
days and weeks. Not talking about a slowly tightening cycle. I'm talking about events, and it's like every day the central banker is giving you an update, and every third day they're actually upping it by another couple of points. Imagine, how does that scenario play out in the US, and would it see many people dehomed and becoming tenants in their ex-owned property potentially?
Yeah, and I think a wealth tax would also play into that. But most people forget mortgages as an example. It's a market rate. Uh, you know, people just in our echo chamber, let's say, a lot of them they say, "Oh, well, you never have to worry about rates going up because the Fed's just going to peg the yield curve, and they'll let inflation run hot. The savers will get screwed, but they'll just peg rates at whatever it's Frankenstein the yield curve,
Yeah,
and they won't let it go up past a certain point." Okay, well that may be fine, but that doesn't necessarily mean that mortgage rates obey, because the market rate is going to add a risk premium.
correct.
So if the market sees that they're going to be paid back with devalued dollars, regardless of where the Fed is pegging the yield curve for treasuries, they don't care. The 10 years at 1.5%, great. You still got mortgage rates at 10%,
Yeah,
because of the risk premium associated with future inflation. That said, I think there's a strong argument for the combining of the balance sheets, like we were talking about before, where the Treasury now has the ability to create bank reserves, which are now seen as legal tender,
yeah,
and they can do whatever they want. And so I think they go in there and buy mortgage-backed securities. They buy the debt. I think they would definitely buy. We've already seen them buy junk debt for corporations. Yes. And everyone, the consumer, the corporations are just levered to the hilt. So if we get into a situation where the market rates are adjusting up, to your point, then the Fed or the Treasury could come in and just buy all of that debt to keep them low. But remember, as that debt goes onto the balance sheet of the government or the Fed, in essence, they're owning more and more of the houses. They're owning more and more of the businesses, to where if they went into default for whatever reason, then they would go to the debt holders, which in this case would be the government.
yeah,
And then I think you go back to that stat we were talking about with 52% of young adults living at home with their parents.
yeah.
And I don't know if Klaus comes in and all in one foul swoop just owns everything, or the government takes everything. But it's just kind of this gradual process where they jack the wealth tax, let's say, up to 90%. And therefore, when the person passes away, their house, they might not have any leverage on it at all. Yeah. But the family has to sell the house because they have to pay the wealth tax.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And maybe there's some way that the government just takes the house instead if you can't sell it, or they pay you 100 cents on the dollar if in nominal prices the housing has gone down. I think it's very interesting what you're talking about with the malls. These malls are going to be ghost towns in the very near future, and we could see something where housing is totally unaffordable because the regulations are so high that the builders can't produce new housing stock, entry-level homes, starter homes at a profit.
Yeah.
So there's just no more supply coming onto the market, and that this becomes a real social problem. And the government buys the mall and demos everything and puts up government housing. And so you have a generation of people that kind of gets accustomed to having government housing. They like it for whatever reason. And, why would you own a normal house? It's cumbersome. You have property taxes. You have to maintain it. I can just live in my government cube, and,
That's right.
I can rent everything. I don't have to own a car, and I'm happy, like Klaus says.
The future high density. the future high density Soviet bloc era homes that you're used to in all those grim movies. We could be about to create that new living class in these repurposed areas of commercial property being flushed out and all of that. I could see that. And they'll be horrible,
Totally.
cheap, tight. And in years to come, they'll be like the council flats in East London, Manchester in the UK, and the Soviet era block boxes, as you call them.
Yeah, and then to think about what that world looks like, you also have to think about that social volatility we were talking about earlier, in the sense that I think pretty much every state now, marijuana is legal. Well, maybe not every state, but within the next 2 or 3 years, every state's going to legalize marijuana, which I think is good from a libertarian standpoint. But it does have unintended consequences. In Oregon, I don't know if you followed this news, they made every drug legal. So not just marijuana, we're talking about cocaine, heroin, crystal meth, shrooms, I don't know, all the drugs, but they made them all legal. Now, okay, I from a libertarian standpoint, I get it, but you can't do that and defund the police
No.
at the same time.
It's not a good combination.
Like that is no bueno, especially when you're in a city that is in terminal decline, as is when you look at the rate of homelessness.
Yeah.
In Portland, I mean, is terrible.
I saw it. Yeah.
It's a big tent city, basically.
Yeah.
And so you have all of these homeless individuals. You make drugs totally legal. You defund the police. And then you have the government owning all housing. How does that play out, right? Like how, at the end of the day, human beings need hope.
Absolutely.
They need hope. And if they don't have hope, then you get very, very bad results. And you look at the welfare state in the U.S. as an example, and you look at the divorce statistics, and I mean, just go down a laundry list of stats that have just become horrible since they implemented this welfare state. And don't take my word on it. You got to look at the work and the research of my favorite economist, Thomas Sowell, who has studied this extensively. But when a human being becomes dependent, an adult becomes dependent upon the state instead of themselves, that
Can I come in on this one? I sat with, I did a very interesting program that was part of becoming a printed author. And I made a female friend who was on the program who wrote a book distinctively on the damage that welfare statism actually does. And she came from North England, which has got a lot of welfare, the ex-shipyards and mines, etc. And the minute you take away the need and therefore the requirement for someone to seek self-actualization by giving them that safety net, not only do they become reliant, but they become unhappier. And they become unhappier because you've taken away their right or reason to exist and to grow. And actually, not only do they take it from you, but they hate you for it. Because deep down, there's an inner knowing and there's an inner understanding that I've taken away all the experiences of you learning to hunt. I've taken away all the experiences of you learning to deliver value. I've taken away your growth. I've taken away your future, largely experiences and growth. Because by learning to deliver value, you get actualized. It's that passing of energy. Money actually comes down to flow of energy, really. Can you do something of high value that people are prepared to release some of their energy to you? And what do you do with that energy? Do you manage it responsibly? And one of my favorite speakers says it always flows from those who value it most away from those that value it least. So if you then create a dividend stream just for existing and being born, you immediately make that person someone who values it least because he knows the further will be there and he can exist and his house is paid for, he's in a council house, he's in this. And you actually put them in a low social strata, even if they could have subsequently self-actualized. So it's an incredibly destructive force. I
Yeah.
won't say there should be a policy of 100% no welfare. You could be exceedingly unlucky. You could trip up and be paralyzed, and all your skills could have been physical. You could be, maimed. There needs to be some degree of community support for exceptional cases. But anybody who's able-bodied should be made. And there's famous sayings that said, "A man's toil is his happiness." That by having a reason to get up in the morning, and responsibilities to make. So I absolutely get that. And what I fear is we are going to break the character of Western man with the economic direction that we're going in. Not just in the masculine sense, I mean, for women as well, but I think particularly in the masculine sense. I mean, in the participation stats on labor, many people don't know, but the male participation stats in labor are lower than the depression lows, because obviously you'll know that from the 30s through the 60s we obviously got lots more female participation, but as a percentage by gender, actually we're destroying male kind very much, and lurching down this. And I wonder, I always say, the reason I never got into dealing drugs is the CIA hates the competition, and they've got nasty habits and nasty people to interact with competition. But that joke aside, it wouldn't surprise me, state and political actors are very strong in this, releasing this new wave and saying, well, here's a freedom and an almost libertarian thing we're giving you. But I would be sure they're behind the profiting in it. And then, as you say, combining that with defunding police, it must be a formula for wanting a slum.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and also too, on what you were just on that topic you were just discussing, I think, and it's a very touchy subject, of course, but I think if you look at society and you want to look at economics, you have to take into consideration the fact that the 50% divorce rate, that let's call it 50% of young males, kids, are being raised by a single mom.
Yeah.
And I'm not here to say that single moms are bad. I'm not, I think obviously
absolutely.
they deserve a lot of respect. But the simple fact of the matter is that's when you're, I mean, when you're a 10-year-old boy, 8-year-old boy, 11-year-old boy, it's very beneficial to have a strong male figure to look up to. And if you don't, most often those 10-year-old boys with just their moms in the picture, a group of them are going to, they're going to find mischievous to get in. They're going to find mischief to get into. They're going to go down the wrong path. And then you take it a step further and you say, okay, well, they're in school. Okay, fine. But 90% of the teachers in school are female.
Yeah.
You see, so you have this generation of males who really have no male influence, positive, strong, resilient male influence in their life. And as those males get into their 20s and 30s, they just, and again, I don't want to, poke fun at anyone. That's not what this is about. It's just the bottom line is you're not going to have the same economic output with that group of males than you would have with a group of males that was brought up with that father figure there that they could learn from, and they could learn how to be resilient, and they could learn the value of getting outside of your comfort zone. I think back to my childhood, and that was the big difference between the my mom and my aunt and my grandmother compared to my uncle, my father, and my grandfather, in the sense that the women would really they're always very loving and very warm and very nurturing, where the guys would be like, okay, you're going to learn to ski, buddy. I'm going to take you to the top of the triple black diamond, and we'll see you at the bottom. Bye. And you just have to stand for yourself. And that's just the way guys operate. And I mean, again, for females, they might think that's horrible and it's mean and it's cruel. But I'm sure your father and the male figures in your life were the exact same way when you were
Absolutely.
growing up. And I think there's something to be said for that.
A bit of sink and swim. George, this has been immense fun. By the way, the comments lit up with that. Many of the guys saying there's a bit of a war on the family, and states
I
trying
would
to
agree.
inject
Killer
itself.
family, that's right.
Yeah, trying to inject itself as the substitute. We're all going to live in virtual worlds as single individuals interacting with state. And these are all worrying
Yep.
trends. But nonetheless, thank you for your great intellect. Thank you for your amazing channel, by the way. We all supporters. And as I say, and I repeat, please go around to George's channel and sub him. He's also got 45,000 followers. Let's see if we can make that 50. He is on at George Gammon with a double M in the surname. Go and grab him there and interact with good grace there. Thank you so much for coming on a second time. I want to wish you a Merry Christmas in spite of all these great challenges. The wolf has shown itself. Here's a virtual sip with you in champagne, and we'll see you in 21, onwards and upwards with the wealth building. And thank you for all you've done. Cheers.
Awesome. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
All the best. Bye-bye.